So greetings, everyone. I see people are coming in into the, I guess, the virtual auditorium. My name is Peter Young. I'm a member of the Committee 100, and I'm actually chair of the Asian American Career Ceilings program that we started about 3.5 years ago. I'm going to give a little bit of a background about this program and some upcoming events, and then I'm going to introduce my two really wonderful panelists, and we can dig into into today's topic, which is a master class on Asian American career ceilings, overcoming bias and stereotypes. So first of all, we started this program almost 4 years ago, mainly because we felt that although there are really quite a number of very, very good government and nonprofit entities tackling the Asian American career ceilings problem, that they tended to be focused on particular areas. And we thought there might be a role for an organization like Committee 100 to really, one, try to pull things together, right? Asian Americans are not known for working in team-like fashion, and one of Fred's favorite phrases is silo, right, Fred?
Yeah.
Well, Asians are famous for being siloed. I would say that. But the other is because it's a serious problem, and there are little gaps in what's being covered or what's being communicated and so forth. So we decided to do that, and we try to be very collaborative with all of the other organizations that are, and one of which is Buck is involved with Hassan, which does a fabulous job with regard to training program, and he'll talk a little bit about that. But there are a couple of facets. One is we focus on a couple of things. One is getting leading scholars who've done studies on this issue to talk about what their data shows, and we've had some wonderful speakers from Columbia, from MIT, from a number of schools share their research on how big is the problem, why is it the problem, et cetera, et cetera. We've also had a lot of people talk about specific industries. So how is it worse or better in retail or in technology, so forth, or media? We've had panels of just millennials who talked about what does it look like from the point of view of millennials. And then we've really shifted more and more into action-oriented things. So we've had summits where we get people together to come up with new ideas and then get people to volunteer and organizations to work together to do this. So we had one in July, for example, with a lot of people, in person and virtual. This is the first of a shift that we're doing where we're adding what we call master classes. And what it is, its purpose is like anything. It's tutorial. It's try to get people or experts to talk about a particular topic. And we have two parallel tracks. One is for individuals, and this is for individuals. So this is why we say Asian American Career Lessons, master classes, topics of value to individual people, right? And who are trying to manage their careers. The other relates to organizational equity organizations. So we're going to be doing a series on, for those people who are running DEI groups or ERG groups or whatever, what are some things that would be helpful to them? And the last thing I would say is the upcoming events. January 15th, we have a masterclass on organizational equity issues. How do you deal with the current problems and opportunities related to DEI and so forth? And there we have Jenny Yang, who was the chair of the Equal Opportunity EOC Commission and worked in government. And then we have Joyce Chang, who is the head of all of equity research for JP Morgan globally, but she also happens to be head of the Asian American DEI group at JP Morgan. So that they're going to give a tutorial on how to pivot and how to deal with what are some of the challenges that are happening. And then we have one that's really interesting on January 16th, the day after, which is how to create a personal brand. And we have a guy who's an expert on how to help people who are Asian American create a personal brand. So if you want to create a personal brand, we've got the master class for you. His name is Jerry Woon, and you'll all get invitations to that. And then we have others planned after that, but those are the next two in the series. So first of all, I'm really delighted with the two panelists we have here. Fred Hassan is the former CEO of two major pharmaceutical companies and has been very, very successful. And he retired, but he, of course, has a problem that he doesn't know how to retire, right? Buck has the same problem, and in fact is very active in the industry, and is a managing director and advisor at Warburg Pincus, which is a very well-known private equity firm. But
not me, no.
I'm not sorry about Fred. So, and if you read his bio, Fred's bio, you'll see he's really had an exceptional career in the industry, and he's Asian American. And when he first entered the drug industry, there weren't a whole lot of people who looked like you, right, Fred? So he'll talk about that. Buck has had a marvelous career in technology. If you look at the companies that he's been executive of, they're kind of a who's who, whether it's Cisco or Hewlett Packard or 3Com or whatever. He's been very, very successful. But he retired after running a division at Cisco, but then he went on to not be retired, and he's been working on a lot of things related to this issue. And in fact, as I mentioned, he is an executive at the Ascent Foundation. And he also has done some very interesting things that he'll talk about, creating programs to help educate people on how to succeed as Asian Americans. So, and we're sort of going to divide this into three parts. The first one is relatively short, and I'm going to ask each of our two panelists to really talk about their careers, with a focus on the things that were relevant to this topic. We're then going to go focus on the stereotypes and biases, that they experienced in their careers, and then shift into what they've observed, having been involved with so many people and so many in other companies with other people, because we want this to be something that's of great value to all of you. And you're all in different situations in different companies. You're not necessarily in the drug industry or in the technology world. The last thing I want to say is that we will leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. And the way you ask questions is you just use the Q&A chat box, type in your questions. The panelists and I will both be able to see the questions, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. How much time we leave will depend upon how many questions you type in. So we hope to have a lot of them. So with that, let's start. Fred, let's start with you, and then we'll move to Buck.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. It's my pleasure to chat with all of you and to also participate in this great panel. Thank you. So as you can hear from my accent, I grew up in Pakistan. I was born there. I grew up there. My whole life has been framed by some basics, one of which is that I tended to be the first in doing a lot of things. So I grew up in a family that had civil service as its background, and I was the first to start thinking beyond that. So number one, I started thinking science, and that had never been done before. And then I actually was ambitious. I got into Imperial College in London, which at that time and probably still is considered the MIT of Europe. So I try to aim high, and then I also did something else. I thought I'd go beyond being just a chemical engineer, which is the degree I came out with, and go into the world of business. So I aimed high. I got into Harvard Business School, and I came out on the other end with an MBA. Now, it's interesting that for a summer job, my first summer job, I've been in this country for 8 months in 1970, and I could have had a very nice staffy job that summer. And instead, I took the toughest job I could find, which was to do customer-facing work, selling, and try to acculturate as fast as they could in the local environment. There was probably nobody like me and that people had seen at that time showing up and trying to sell a deal in drugstores in the south of Bronx and Westchester County and other places. It was a tough job. I learned a lot, though. I learned a lot.
South Bronx, that's a tough neighborhood.
I was the guy in the suit carrying a thing, and I actually attracted a lot of attention beyond looking different. I was a guy in a suit, and I was carrying this bag for samples for pharmacists in drugstores. Yeah. Anyway, so and then I came out, and instead of going to chemicals, I went into pharmaceuticals, which was an adjacency, but where I thought there'd be more innovation. And I joined a multinational company, which is now Novartis, which is a very large pharmaceutical company. And then they offered me a role. They saw something in me. They said, hey, maybe you should be challenged a little bit more. So a year and a half out, they offered me a line job in Lincoln, Nebraska. So here I am in Lincoln, Nebraska, somebody in a suit with an accent. People hadn't seen people like me. Very few people who looked like me in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1974. And that was a fantastic learning. So I kept going outside my comfort zone in this company. And 12 years out of Harvard Business School, they actually gave me the largest unit inside this company. At that time, it was called Sandoz. Now it's called Novartis.
Right.
So I gave me to run the U.S. operation, which was very large operation. And unprecedented, nobody looked like me. And there was a pattern that was underestimated. They said, hey, this guy, is he really going to make it? And I actually surprised them with my outperformance. And then later on, I ended up with another company, American Home Products, because I had the opportunity to move up the ranks. And that company then became Wyatt later on. But I had the chance from American Home Products to actually be a public company CEO, which was also unprecedented. This is 1997. There was nobody out there, a large company, public company CEO with maybe 30,000 employees around the world who looked like me. And there too, they said, maybe not, but I was fine. I over-delivered. We did a big merger with Monsanto. And then we had an exit with Pfizer for $62 billion in 2003. And then right after the exit, I became CEO of Schering-Plough. By this time, I was building up a reputation as somebody who could take on difficult challenges. And that too was a turnaround and transformation. So bottom line from my perspective is always be prepared to be underestimated and always focus on delivering and keeping a cool head and not getting too spooked with the environment around you. So that's my lesson in life, Peter. Great. And I've kept doing a lot of different things since that time. Yeah.
And we'll explore the stereotypes bias issues with Fred. Buck, summary of your career.
So I'm going to give a shorter summary of the first part of my career and talk about things I've done for the last 20 years since I retired, because I think that's relevant to what we're doing here. But it looks like we have a panel here of 3 Harvard MBAs, I think, because I went.
Yes.
But I was going to, I thought about that. I got a thought about it, and I got to tell the audience a short story. So I didn't realize the 3 Harvard MBAs, but right. just so you understand the story is, I went to Harvard Business School. I did well, but there was a dinner by the dean, and he said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you did well. The bad news is we did a study, and there's an inverse correlation between success and how well a Harvard Business School student does. So if you go to Harvard Business School, the key is don't get good grades, because that's how you're going to be successful.
So let me summarize my life sort of before and after the MBA. So actually, I graduated from Stanford as a computer designer, went to HP, designed a computer, decided that actually I wanted to be the general manager. I said, that was the job I want. So I said, how do I do that? a good business school. So I went to business school and then came back to Silicon Valley and spent my time, unlike you, Fred, who went from company to company as you're acquired. Actually, I spent my time in Silicon Valley after my MBA, basically starting companies. So I was an entrepreneur and 3 flops, total flops, lost a lot of money. But I was acquired by Cisco twice and did 1 IPO. My last time I was acquired by Cisco was 2004, and I became general manager of division inside Cisco. And that's when this whole part of my life changed. When I realized in 2006 that out of 104 vice presidents and 20 general managers, let's say, in Cisco development, I was the only East Asian. In an organization, development organization, that was 70% Asian, either East or South. East Asian was about 25%, and I was one of 104. And so Denise Peck, who may be on the call, actually moved over from marketing, and there were 2 of us all of a sudden. And we decided we got to do something about this. And one of the things we did, and this leads to the leadership question, training question, is that we called a meeting of about 30 East Asian directors, marketing directors, engineering directors, and we had a 2-hour meeting to talk about this. And after the 2-hour meeting, my conclusion was, and I want to generalize here, these guys need help. I wouldn't promote them either. There'd been none promoted for 5 years prior. And I can understand why none of these guys were promoted. They don't understand basic leadership skills. And so because of that, then Denise and I went on, we brought some leadership training in from an established vendor. I sat in the class and I listened to this guy talk, and I said, this is terrible. This is middle management leadership, not executive leadership. It was kind of be comfortable, feel like you fit in. And I'll say this bluntly, as a leader, you're not trying to fit in. Okay, that's not your job. Your job is to lead, not fit in. And so occasionally that means conflict, that means other things. And so we went out looking for leadership training at the higher levels. And that's what led to the Stanford program that Wes Hom and IBM VP and I created in 2010 at Stanford Business School for executive leadership training. It also led to the work that a number of us did at Ascend, creating management training or leadership training for mid-career people. And so I've been doing that and writing papers and doing research and pushing people to lead, pushing people to be champions in the companies and make change for the last 20 years.
Well, that's wonderful. By the way, I'm just the moderator, but I run an investment banking firm, and I've been a senior person at 3 major investment banks. And I got to tell you, some of these issues, they're the same, whether it's technology or the drug industry or investment banking, right? But they've also evolved over time too. And what the issues were 30 years ago, 40 years ago versus today, they're different, but it's still a problem, right? It's still a problem. It's just different and maybe not as big a problem as 20, 30 years ago. So what I'd like to do, let's turn to really a question of, we'll talk to broader, but maybe turn to the question of how each of you in your own careers, right, dealt with stereotypes and biases. How did you identify it? And, and then what did you do to try to overcome either a bias or a stereotype affecting you personally, right? So Fred, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So it's very hard to know any overt bias because people are very polite. And they were also very polite in the 1970s when I was trying to make my way up the ladder. So it's hard to know who's got bias and who doesn't have bias, or who has stereotype, who doesn't have stereotype. I tried in my own way to assume that there would be some of it out there, but that I would not know for sure. So I was not going to worry about it. And my only focus was to keep a cool head, to be very resolved in what I was doing, and be prepared to be 120%. That was the number in those days. Now it's probably more 105 or maybe even 100 or even less than 100 in some areas, but it was about 120%. And somehow that formula worked for me. But it's very rare for people to overtly say things to you, or you hear things that are not appropriate. The people are very, very polite and very careful. So that's my observation.
Or maybe another term, sometimes a little devious, right?
Oh, yeah, right,
But
right.
was there any one case where, even though the people didn't directly, stereotype or bias, where you could tell that you were being stereotyped or there was a bias against you? Was there an example of that? And then what did you do to try to overcome it? If you were able to overcome it, maybe not.
Yeah, no. So when I was in Lincoln, Nebraska,
Mhm.
they saw that I was well educated, and so they gave me the marketing job.
Mhm.
But the real power in that company at that time was the sales force. It was a sales and marketing company. So Salesforce was the line jobs. It was all white. No African Americans, no East Asians, no South Asians. It was just, that's the way it was. And here I am aspiring to be head of sales and marketing. And I just spent time with the sales force. I just acculturated. I actually was curious. I worked with them. They actually became good friends. Some of them became advocates for me. And then going back to something which was not a planned thing, but just happened to be the case, because I'd sold as a rep in a tough part of the world, that actually gave me a lot of credibility.
Yeah, right.
So, very unprecedented move. They made this South Asian head of sales and marketing in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1976.
Mhm.
So that's, but I knew there was a bias because they would not expose Asians or African Americans as customer-facing people in those days. There was a bias, an assumption that, hey, they're very good in the office, but they're not ready yet for the customers.
So one of the ways you overcome it, Cam, is you took a skill that is important in that company, right? Like if
Yeah.
sales wasn't important in that company, then it wouldn't work. And
Yeah.
then you push yourself, you went into that, and that built credibility, right? Because you turned out to be good at, but also it was one of the core skills, right, in the company, right?
Yeah. And typically in those days, there was a tendency for marketing people to comment on the salespeople. There was a bit of a schism, a silo. And in my case, it was totally the opposite. I made very good friends with the district managers. That's the frontline sales manager, and moved in very easily. I didn't just go to the top people in sales. I actually moved in at the field manager level. And that gave a lot of credibility to my persona, and made it a lot easier for people to see me as the head of sales and marketing, which was the number 2 job in that company at that time.
By the
And that
way,
helped me become a general manager. Pardon,
yeah.
yeah.
By the way, what you said though about meeting people and getting to know them, it
Yeah.
reminds me of the story we had as a speaker, the first Asian American head of Heidrick and Struggles,
Mhm.
who's Indian American, and he
Mhm.
took the same approach. He went to all the different offices. He went out of his way. If he was down in the Washington area, he would go down to that, and he would go and talk to people and so forth. And what happened was that people got to know him personally as opposed to just a name. And when it came around to who did they feel comfortable leading, his name kept coming up, right? Because he went out of his way to get to know people and develop some broad support. Buck, how about you?
Mhm.
So
Any examples of stereotypes or bias in your career?
I'll give you a incident, but I want to expand on this incident and tie it to the thing you just said, and Fred's general experience too. And in particular, I was interviewing for a head of marketing job at a startup a few years ago. I mean, many years ago. And CEO said, "Great, you look great. I mean, I love you, Buck. Blah blah blah. You Harvard MBA, computer and all stuff." And he says, yeah, I'd like to offer the job of director of marketing. I said, Mike, I'm actually interviewing for the VP of marketing job. And he said, well, and that shook him up. And I said, well, in that case, go talk to my VC. So I went to the VC, and fortunately, I had known the VC from another relationship. He said, you've earned it, it's all yours. So it's clear that he didn't look at me as as an Asian guy being the head of the marketing, even though if you look at my experience, right, it was there. Been director of marketing of different companies, different startups for like 5 or 6 years before then. So it's clearly I was looking for promotion. And that ties into two things. One is there is implicit bias, and I don't look at this malicious. People don't run into people bluntly like us. Okay, many of the Asian Americans they run into fit the stereotype, and I don't blame them for having that opinion, because if most of who they see fit the stereotype, and I look like that, then it's not their fault. It's my responsibility, and an internal saying I've always had in even early on, and I grew up in a town which we were the only Chinese family in town, is an internal feeling that I have to show I'm not who you think I am, because I know who you think I am. So I overtly do things. And that's important. That kind of ties what Fred was doing. And in particular, the one thing we teach in Ascend classes is that first impressions are very important, because what happens, especially higher levels, you meet people not every day. And if the first impression they have of you is they see you for a minute or 2 minutes in a meeting and you don't say anything, you fit the stereotype. So one thing you can do is be sure that first impression you give them is positive, affirmative, and assertive. Okay. And it's not racism per se. I have a funny story that my friend Wes Hom tells. When he was a VP at IBM, and he ran Japan for like a year or something. And he said he'd go into these meetings with his subordinates. His subordinates would have white subordinates, and he'd sit across the table from the Japanese counterparts. And they would always start the meeting addressing the white guy to his right. Look at him. Until Wes said, hey, actually, I'm in charge here. So it's, so it's not white racism. It's the assumption that when most of the people they saw were white guys in charge, they turn to the white guy. Okay. So that's why the things people can do, is be sure every time you meet somebody, do something, do something that show that you're not who they think you are, because we know who they think you are.
By the way, I'm going to tell the audience, I've known both Buck and Fred for a long time. I've known Fred for a really long time. And I guarantee you that if there's a meeting for an hour, it is impossible for Fred and Buck not to say things during the meeting. I guarantee you that.
And I see Fred shaking, agree with it.
Yeah, no,
Completely agree.
It happens to be true, which is a positive. One of the questions I would ask is, a lot of people, they get, they say, oh, society, the system discriminates and so forth. My own personal view is that some of the problem is self-created, right? Where either because the parents say, oh, you just study hard, don't say anything, just get good grades and succeed, which of course, doesn't always work, obviously, for the obvious reasons, but also where a lot of Asian Americans pigeonhole themselves, right? They create this image of themselves to themselves, and they essentially, limit themselves, right? And they create this image. Do Buck and Fred, do you feel that's true? And if so, how does someone sort of identify that they're doing that to themselves and try to, fix the problem that they're creating themselves?
Yeah, Buck, do you want to try that first, or shall I come?
The problem is a misfit between Asian cultural norms and the norms of business that are expected of an executive. Okay. If you grew up in an Asian, like I did, my mother said, keep your mouth shut and do the work. She didn't say it that way, but right.
Yeah, sure.
Essentially,
But-
that's what she said, right?
Yeah.
And you know, and defer to your elders also, especially you must start with your elder, right? In the old days, I mean, we'd visit our friends, right, in San Francisco, and I'd be sitting with all these old people, like our age at this point, and she'd say, just, you know, just don't say anything, just sit there and be quiet. Well, in a business meeting, that's considered basically non-leadership material. So what your parents are telling you is what may work in Asia for leadership and good behavior is different than what is expected of people like us, okay, at an exec level. Okay, we're supposed, if we have something to say, we're supposed to say it, not defer, because and I learned that early on. When I got moved laterally, I said, what's going on? Is basically the problem is I'm not, even though I knew it was going wrong, something was wrong. I was, you know, my basic instincts were don't say anything, you know, because my boss is doing this,
Yeah.
you know, and I learned that lesson early on.
And Fred, obviously, in your own personal experience,
Mm.
you revolted against your family's thing about everybody had to do civil service, and I'm sure that was kind of an interesting thing, but that was key, right? Because otherwise, you would have just been in civil service, right?
Yeah, so it's really escaping your comfort zone deliberately, proactively saying, "Hey, I'm going to try something different." And also going back to what Buck is saying, Asian cultures and the culture I grew up in was exactly the same. Don't say too much. Speak up when you need to speak up, but be 110% sure you know what you're talking about. And then just don't say much in the presence of elders. So anyway, that was the culture, and I have to admit that coming to the U.S. was a bit of a culture change for me in that regard, because at Harvard Business School, I noticed that you needed to know only at the 75% level and say something. And here I was waiting to get to my 110% level and saying nothing. And 50% of our grade was going to come from class contribution. So I learned pretty soon I'd better start speaking up.
Yeah.
And that actually created a very good habit in me for the rest of my life, not to be too afraid to make a mistake, not to be too afraid to be not 100% right. I think culturally that's a very important thing for Asian Americans to speak up and to let people know where they are making a contribution. Sometimes you can do that without appearing self-promotional. It can be done, but people need to know if you're making a contribution, that you're there and that you're still a team player. You are a team player, but you're really doing it the right way and not hesitating. It's in the end, we are really the CEOs of our own life journey, and we have to be our own best advocates. So
Yeah.
as Buck, as you said, we have to do it in the right way. But the key is not to appear politicking or self-promoting or carrying your ambition on your sleeve, because then people are going to turn against you.
Right.
Making sure people will root for you in your absence.
Hey, Peter, can
Yeah,
I answer one question that popped up in the Q&A?
No. We're not going to Q&A until
Okay, all right, okay.
right. I'm the moderator. We'll do
Okay.
that. I actually want to though extend something that both of you said, and that is, you know, we talked about how family and parents can really help you, but also then really hold you back, right? Because they have this image of, you know, study hard or whatever. But it's not just when you're growing up. And in fact, people in the audience here, you're probably, I assume most of you are no longer living at home, or maybe some of you are. It extends beyond that you can end up being constrained by your family well after you leave, right? And I think that's true. No one said that an Asian mom stops trying to influence you when you leave for college, right? That's not true. But you know, I have to say my story was similar to Fred, which is, you know, I had two sisters and my parents were traditional Chinese parents. You know, they were both professors, and they said, and my parents made it clear to me when I was a junior high school, they said, well, we want you to go to MIT and study science. And that was it. I said, well, any other schools? I said, no, MIT, that's it, right? But that's classic, right? In that era.
Yep. Yep.
And then, by the way, I ended up getting into MIT, but I went to Yale, and they didn't talk to me for 2 years because they were so upset. They were so upset. But again, I think one of the lessons here I think we're hearing is don't be afraid to rebel, right?
Mm.
Whether
Yeah.
it's in your early years or in your later years, don't be afraid to take risk and rebel against what everyone around you is saying is conventional wisdom, because it may hurt you, right? It may create self-constraints, right? I have one question, which is, pretty much 50% of all, we've done about 40 of these events over the last 3 years. The phrase mentor comes up all the time, right? And people say it's so important to have a mentor, develop a mentor, whatever. I want to explore that with the two of you about the stereotypes, because, of course, the problem, I suspect the two of you, when you were starting, there were no Asian senior guys, so you couldn't get a mentor who was above you, who was Asian American. So really the question for both of you is, one, was mentorship somehow important in your success? That's the first thing. But also, how did you apply mentorship in that context, right? I mean, there are different types of mentorship, people to the side, people above. But of course, one challenge is kind of hard to get an Asian American mentor if there's no one above you, right? So can both of you sort of elaborate on that from your personal experience, but also your observations?
Buck, you want to go again?
Sure. So I have a two-part answer. The first part is looking for being mentored, and second is me mentoring. So the first question, actually, I never had a mentor. I've had a sponsor, okay, who identified me as really good and put a couple of them and push me forward. But I've never had a mentor per se. And partly that's my own ego, I think, more than anything else. And the other reason is, again, when you're the only Asian there, again, I never look myself as Asian per se. I look myself as being who I am, and I understand how people see me, and I understand what I could do. With regard to me mentoring, though, the best story is I had a friend who was she was a banker. We talked every once in a while, and we're at an Ascend conference one day, and she was on the panel. So I'm sitting in the audience listening to her, and she said, "I've had many mentors in my life. For example, Buck G sitting there in the audience," and I'm thinking, I never said I was she never asked me to be a mentor. The only thing she would do is every once in a while she would call me for some questions and ask me how do that. So there really was never, quote, a mentoring relationship as much as somebody who you trust, you ask questions to and give advice. So to the extent that I mentored people, that's what I did. I've never had anybody ask me to be a mentor. And actually, a couple people said, "Will you be a mentor?" I said, "You can ask me anytime. You can ask me questions anytime you want. I'll I try to be helpful to everybody I know." So that's my comment on mentorship.
Yeah, Fred.
Yeah. So Peter, I didn't have a single mentor because that wasn't necessary, but I did use the listening skills I had coming from the culture I grew up in to be a good listener, to actually seek feedback. I literally talked to people, and people really felt very flattered that I asked for constructive feedback. Often they were very surprised because it's not that easy in the Western culture to be that humble and to go around asking for feedback. That came a little more easily to me. So I used rotating mentors based on the situation, and I learned a lot from them. And in fact, some of the mentors turned into advocates, because once they got to know me, once there was trust, once you build up that I really was genuinely trying to work in favor of the company, not just my personal agenda, but the company agenda, trying to do the right thing. In fact, they were advocates for me when I didn't even ask them to be advocates. They said good things about me behind my back. That made a big difference in the way I got the new job opportunities inside a large company.
Yeah. And actually, you're making a really good point because there are different types of mentors, right? I mean,
Right.
it's not just, oh, can that person help me get a better job or promotion? It could be just simply someone helps you understand yourself and develop the right skills, so forth. So you have to think of mentorship as a kind of a Swiss Army knife. In other words,
Yeah.
a mentorship can help you in so many different ways, but they're not necessarily all the same. I think another thing, and actually, I actually had a nice conversation with someone earlier today who just wanted to talk about their career. And this mentorship question came up, and I said, don't think narrowly of mentorships just within your own company. There are mentorships across to a different company or even different industry, and that could be really useful to you ultimately. Certainly when it comes to just giving advice about how to be a better manager or whatever, if someone happens to be the CFO or head of sales at a different company, their advice could be just as valuable as somebody within your company. So one of the things I try to encourage people is don't think of mentorship just vertically, right? Think of it also, on the out to other industries or other companies, because those mentorships can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, right? Has that been true for the two of you in your own careers or as you observed other people?
I, I, I mean, just actually, a funny thing is actually after this meeting, I'm meeting someone across the street, a Stanford student who wants some advice on career advice. So to the extent, I'm willing to help anybody if I can help them, it makes sense. And so yes, and I'm pretty open, and I've nothing to gain by it other than the fact that I want to help the community, and people know that. But
so we want all the people who are on this thing. We are up to like 120 or something that. I'll give you Buck's email address and you just make an appointment. He's no problem. And his rate is really good, right? Buck, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Fred, any
Every opportunity to learn, to look for feedback, whether it's a direct boss's boss, or somebody in another department or division, or even somebody out there as a competitor. You always learn something. And the key is to remain very humble and very curious and very appreciative of those who give you something, who teach you. People like to be appreciated. People like to be told that they made a difference for you. I found mentoring to be very valuable. And also, as Buck said, if you help other people, you're actually learning a lot in the process yourself. So being a mentor can also be a very valuable exercise in learning more about life. And especially human psychology, I think, is something where they don't teach you much in school. You have to learn it out there in the school of life. And a lot of people can tell you a lot about those things.
Can I add one more thing to that thought?
Sure,
also, that Fred, and that is part of the benefit from this is building your network of people who know you. And what I've learned in Silicon Valley is that they may not be in a position to help you at time X, but if they know you and they know you're doing mean the right thing and doing it for the right reasons, you never know when a couple years down the road they made a position to recommend you for something. So please, in terms of countercultural stuff, yeah, you need to reach out. You need to build relationships with people who may or may not matter, and do it for the right reason. Do it because if you want to help, then do it then help, and they'll know if you really mean it or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Take the long view, and to be honest with you, also just realize that in many cases, you just might end up with a friend, right? And if that's all you get, and as a result, that's a wonderful thing, right? If you develop a friendship, right? And it doesn't really, end up benefiting your career or whatever. You Buck?
Yeah. I changed when I got some feedback when I was my first director of marketing job at business school, and my GM came to me after like 3 months on the job, and went to some sales meetings. Says, Buck, you don't schmooze well. That is to say, you go to these cocktail parties and you talk to people No, we want to talk to sales guys, right, and build relationships there, and that is your job, right? is let them get to know you, because you're going to need their help when you want them to sell product.
Yeah,
And
the other
you're
thing,
nodding your head, Fred.
the
No,
other
I actually wanted to give you a very quick incident that occurred. I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, and a young leader of a small group, and my product manager made a mistake, and I dressed him down a little bit in front of people in the sales group and other groups. And later on, my boss, who had been a school teacher in a place called Hooper, Nebraska, he he just wrote down a simple thing for me: uh, praise in public, criticize in private. I'll never forget that little mentoring that he did for me, and I'm grateful to this day, because I realized after that that I really need to be very careful about the time when I need to get tough with somebody. It has to be a private time, not out there with the people. A very important learning opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I add one more thing that to tie on that? I said real quick, and that is, again, I won't tell you the whole story, but at some point I had won't tell the story, but I had an aha moment after business school when I realized my job is no longer to be the smartest kid in the room anymore. My job is be sure to help my people do their best, okay? Not to show that I'm the best. And that's the difference between when you go up there. That's your attitude you have to have.
Yeah. The other thing, one comment is try to be genuine, because most of the people you might approach, they're just not stupid. And you know, so if you approach somebody and you have a really canned, pitch, whatever, it's just it's just not going to work. I mean, I'll tell you, I get requests all the time. People say, "Oh, I would like to meet you, and I'd like you to tell me about your career." Well, I mean, it's just not a powerful pitch. I mean, why do I want to meet a stranger to talk about my career? But if someone just says, "Hey, look, I'm struggling to think about what to do next, and I've been moving from B of A to this or whatever, but I would appreciate getting some advice," I'm more likely to say, "Sure, yeah, let's have a Zoom session or whatever," rather than somebody saying, disingenuous, like, "Let me tell you you tell me about your successful career," right? It's just not going to work. By the way, one of the things I also wanted to mention is be careful not to get trapped by trying to take advantage of a stereotype, thinking you're going to get ahead, because sometimes it's a trap. I'll give you a good example. It is very common for people to say, "Oh, if I want to get ahead, I'm Asian, so I'll volunteer to go to the Tokyo office or the Shanghai office and be Asian." And then later on, sometimes it works, right? Because they get a responsibility to do a job and then they come back. But often they can't figure out why they can't get back to the headquarters, right? Because now you have created your own stereotype to be the Asia guy, right? Not the corporate senior guy, the Asia guy. So there are many examples of that, but be very, very careful to be careful not to use stereotypes thinking it's going to get you an advantage, because it actually might backfire. Does that make sense to Buck, you and Fred at all? I mean, I'm sure you.
Yeah. And if in fact, I gave it when I was at Cisco, I gave advice to this one Chinese VP was hired in, and and about 6 months after he was hired, he was offered by John Chambers to head the China office, R&D office, and he asked me, "Buck, what do you think?" I said, "Only do it if you have a return ticket."
Okay. Same concept, right?
Because if you're out there, then you're out of the mainstream promotion track. You got to get back in corporate for the mainstream promotion track.
Yeah, on top of maybe stereotyped, right? As being the Asia guy. So we have.
It's very interesting to see who are the CEOs in any particular industry, and there's a certain track pattern. So in my industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the typical track pattern is that you've built your career in domestic. The US is the most important market around the world, and typically in a commercial function. And that's your way to, that improves your chances to get there. If you're sent out there somewhere, you are now in the foreign service, and you will remain in the foreign service for a long, long time. So completely agree with you, Peter.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left, and we have 11 questions. So we're gonna turn over to the Q&A. Kathy Koo has one question for both of you, meaning Buck, you and Fred. What do you think could be changed about organizations or systems that would better include Asian Americans as leaders versus us having to fit the mold or what leader in this society looks like, i.e. a white male straight? So it's more what could be changed about the organizations and the systems?
So
Buck,
I've
you want
got-
to take a crack at it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a short two-part answer. The first part answer, don't wait for things to change like that. Certainly, I and a lot of people are trying to work the change, but bluntly, it's not your company. It is corporate America has certain expectations about leaders. It's tweakable to some extent in terms of they can modify it, but by and large, the things we talk about leadership skills are universal in the Western world. Okay, it's different than the East, and you know, you're not going to change Japan, you're not going to change China, and you're not going to change America.
Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I mean, they are not going to change for you. That's as you said, Buck, they're not going to change for you. The one thing you should remember is that among all the advanced countries in the world, in my opinion, the two countries which have the most level playing field is the US and Canada. So just you're probably in the best place, but the reality is that you have to be out there proving yourself. And as Buck said, disproving the stereotype, because people hold these stereotypes quietly in their minds. And that's where the 120% test comes in. You got to show that you can do whatever needs to be done and that you can do it as well as, if not better than, the other people. I've had to deal with that in the 70s and 80s, a lot less now because things have really opened up everywhere. But still, there are many times when you have to work harder, work better, and show that you can outperform.
The only thing you can change for additional education for Asian Americans or Black Hispanics. So you can get your companies to do that, but in terms of where you want to get to, that doesn't change. How you get there, you have the company help you do that. And again, at Cisco, what we did is we created an internal development program for Asian American middle managers. So the company will help you do that, but basic skills remain unchanged.
Yeah, there's a question specifically for Buck, but I just want to comment on what Buck said. Unfortunately, this backlash against DEI is going to be a challenge, right? For the things, Buck, you were talking about, right? It's going to be harder for companies to create a Asian American training group or whatever. And it's unfortunate because, you know, these programs, if they're done right, can really help everyone and can help the company. But so here's a question. It says, for Buck, so it's very specific. What were the specific skills you saw the group of Asian American individuals lacking in order to be promoted? And what are the executive specific leaderships you commonly see Asian Americans need to work on?
So there are really three things, and this defines the core that we do at Stanford. Number one is building power and influence, that is building relationships, which really Fred was talking about, building relationships so that when you need them, you can get things done in your corporation. Because most times the things you need to get done are not within your control. So you have to influence outcomes, influence internal behaviors, number one. Okay. Number two is taking risks. What I saw was people unwilling to risk their career to do a few things. And so it's really being able to take risks. At least in Cisco, it was kind of a hero mentality. You know, you identify people who do great things, but that means doing things at risk. And the third thing is actually dealing with conflict. That is, say, because at a certain level, you have to be able to deal with conflict, and in a productive way, and sometimes it means sometimes it means conflict between different organizations. Sometimes it's with different people, but yeah, those are the kind of things which are, I'll say, counter to what we're taught as kids, and that's the issue.
So we have a question here, which is an interesting one. So what's your advice on handling situations where you try to lean in other words, take initiatives, coffee chats, meet with senior management, share ideas, etc., but sees limited impact, and you notice that senior management has, quote, their guys, their posse, whom they always grab lunch with and drinks and socialize with, but not you. So how critical is it for Asians and underrepresented individuals to be near or, the inner circle to move up and succeed beyond it? So really there are two parts to this question. One is, how do you break through a social circle, golf or, drinking, whatever that's been formed, but you're on the outside. And the other is, I guess the second is more is how critical is to be near an inner circle to move up. An interesting question, right?
So let me take a crack at it. I think you sense it all the time. We all do sometimes that you don't belong to the same golf group or the same country club, and there's some overt favoritism inside the company. That's the reality we live in. And number one, I would say,
Did I lose you?
and that because if you start feeling like a victim, it's going to hurt you on the inside and it's going to hurt your outside too. And secondly, just focus on trying hard, network. That does finally start to make a difference. And if in the end you sense that it's impossible, then go find another job, find another company.
Right.
You're in the wrong place.
Get out of the trap, right?
Yeah.
So I have a two-part answer. First part answer actually comes from Jeff Pfeffer, who wrote a book called Power and Influence. And we use that at Stanford Business School to teach a section on the issue that I'm talking about. And his answer would be from his book, and basically research, is that you need to build a relationship, some sort of relationship outside the specifics of work with a person. And you have to have three elements of connectivity, okay? And because tall white men have the white men part, and if they have golf, they've done it. So you have something other to talk about and build a relationship so they know you. So whether it's movies or kids or where you grew up or the school you went to, find at least three connection points so they see you as a person. The only thing about that is, as Sheryl Sandberg points out in her book, so you're trying to build a personal relationship, so you want to be sure it's not too personal, right? And people don't perceive it as being too personal. But that's the key, is you have to build some sort of relationship where you can talk about stuff other than work. And until you build your own, build your own boys club or build your own movie club or MIT club, or as we found out, an HBS club here.
So there's a question here for both of you, and it says from Alan Lowe. The other one's from Mr. or Ms. Anonymous, so we don't know who that is. I've been very appreciative of the growing number of AAPI career programs of the past decade. What evidence do we have that these programs are actually making a difference in breaking the bamboo ceiling? My impression is the project seems slow. So what else can be done? I guess saying, first of all, is it slow? And if so, why? But what could we do to speed up the progress?
I think, Buck, you're a little more qualified to answer this.
So to the first point, there's actually been very little change in terms of looking at, the numbers have gone up, but in proportion to the population, actually is more coming into the bottom than they're rising to the top. So actually it's very little progress. The one bit of progress that has been made is that it used to be there were very few of us in Ascend talking about this. The conversation has expanded, so there's more awareness of the need to do that. Okay, the reason it hasn't changed is this, because most of the problems are generally systemic. That to say we can make mentoring people, but until we make some systemic changes, and I push for champions to do that, and so we need the champions to be in companies pushing for some change in understanding the need of Asian Americans to be educated, to change, understand the leadership culture, and then for the companies to change. And I think that's going to take some time. I'm optimistic. I think we'll get there, but it's going to take some time.
So we have time for one last question, and it's a different one. Again, from anonymous attendee, who's really asked lots of questions. One question to each of you. Any one book that you could recommend to the audience that influenced you and help you become who you are today. I'm going to start out in saying Fred wrote a book a couple of years ago that was really, really, really excellent. And I would recommend it. He's not going to recommend himself because he wrote it, but I have a copy and I highly recommend it. And it's along this issue of managing well and so forth. So Fred's too bashful to say it, but so both of you, any one book you would recommend to this audience?
Yeah, the Jeff Pfeffer book, again, I didn't read it before, but what happens is when we started class and we sat in the class and I said, boy, I like what he says. I read the book, and what I found reading the book was, oh, I did this. I did this. I did this. So a lot of things that he advocated for, I found just because that's the person I am, I did. So I would highly recommend Jeff's book. It's very controversial, but he's great.
Fred?
I would recommend two books. One by Jack Welch called Jack. No, Straight from the Gut.
Yeah,
A
right.
very good book. And now, Jack is slightly controversial because many of the diversification acquisitions he made did not work out well under his successor. But he was a very, very good CEO, very inspiring CEO, and got a lot out of the people that he managed. The other person is Lee Iacocca, who in some ways had to deal with bias, being an Italian American at that time, and who made his way up through the auto industry that was not that really wasn't Italian American at all in those days. So and he writes about his experiences, his knowledge, how he dealt with various things. Again, a great person. So these two books I found very inspirational.
Yeah. So I'm going to end with one quick story about Lee Iacocca, though, and that is when I was at Solomon Brothers, we were selling a business that Lee Iacocca wanted to buy. And as a public company, and there were three shareholders that together owned about, 40%, but at the end they had to agree to sell. And Lee Iacocca really wanted it. There was a negotiating session. And so I just advised, I said, put one of the four of you on a plane going from LA to New York for that whole time, and let's have a negotiating session and see what happens. And so we had the negotiating session, and Lee was so anxious to close the deal. He kept raising the price. And finally, our guy, the fourth guy, landed, called in, and we said, here's the price. He said, I accept that, and we did the deal. So that's my one Lee Iacocca story. So look, first of all, I really, really want to thank the two of you, Buck and Fred. I think my guess is that the two of you would be very, very good panelists for this, and that's true. And from very different angles, right? The two of you have very different careers, so that was very, very helpful. I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank Anonymous for all the really good questions. Anonymous attendee, I hope you found this very valuable. And the next two, January 15th, is going to be how to run DEI groups in the current environment, and that's going to be a master class. And then on the 16th, it's going to be how to develop a personal brand, which I personally am looking forward to because people don't talk about it that much, but it's actually it's an important skill, right? So thank you all, and thank you for the audience. This was recorded, so Fred and Buck are going to get their family members to binge watch this, but we'll post the link on the Committee 100 website if you want to watch it again, or have a friend who'd like to watch it. So thank you very much, all.